Hi, good morning everybody. Welcome to Sunday morning's Indycar. My name's Gordon Ross and I am broadcasting this morning from a slightly misty but thankfully ice-free Bearsden this morning. So I hope you're all having a pleasant weekend, and I started the broadcast today with a little caption talking about dissonance, about cognitive dissonance, the difference between what we're told is real and what we experience in real life. And I was touched by a quotation recently which I saw on the internet last night on Facebook, in fact, and it was about a lady in Aberdeen who was challenged by a British nationalist or British supporter who wanted to remain in the Union and said, "Why do you want independence?" And the woman looked out to sea from the shore and said, "All I can see," she said, "out there are hundreds of oil rigs." She said, "And yet if I turn around and look behind me, all I can see are food banks." And that is the absolute perfect crystallisation of what cognitive dissonance in Scotland actually means. It's the jarring incongruousness of the fact that we are one of the wealthiest small countries on the planet, and yet we're poor. How can that possibly be true? And yet it is true. And the reasons for it are complicated, but if you boil them down to the most simplistic terms, the reason that we're poor is because our natural resources are being siphoned away by a neighbouring country and spent on weapons of mass destruction, or they're spent on propping up a very poorly performing economy which has very little export industry. But the point is that Scotland is in a union, and in a union we are supposed to play an equal part to all the other countries in that union. Now, if we were just, say, Scotland and we were in the European Union, we would be one of 27 countries, and we would have equal representation on the Council of Europe, and at the Parliament we would have a proportionate number of people representing us, as many as any other country would have. And yet in the union that we're in the United Kingdom, we have a ninth of the representation of English MPs, and so we can never ever get ourselves what we need. We can never ever actually fight for anything and win it, because we will always be outnumbered 9-1. So this cognitive dissonance manifests itself in different ways, but I think it's worth remembering this week, and in the news both yesterday and today, it is now being said that the Ministry of Defence cannot actually afford to buy the equipment that they're planning to buy over the next 10 years, because the country is so strapped for cash they can't afford basic things like military vehicles, weapons, uniforms, artillery pieces, the kind of things which armies use every single day. And we now have an aircraft carrier, the Queen Elizabeth II, the largest ship ever constructed for the Royal Navy, costing over £2 billion, without any aeroplanes to land on it, because they can't actually afford to buy the aeroplanes from the United States, and they've even had to scale back the numbers of planes that they're ordering. So the British economy is in a woeful state as it is, and as we are thundering towards Brexit, it's becoming very obvious now that Scotland is going to be the cash cow after Brexit. And I've already posted earlier in the week that the last remaining possible defence for Scottish democracy has now been swept aside by Tory MPs and by Tory committees, which are loaded to the gunwales with extra people to make sure they always outnumber the opposition. So nothing that Scots do, or even anything that the Labour Party in Britain can do, will actually stop the Brexit bulldozer from basically pushing everything else aside. And so because of that, there is now not just a dissonance in Scotland, there's an actual danger of Scotland being completely ruined by Brexit. Not only will we be having our oil siphoned away in food banks in the country where we should be oil rich, and where we should be whisky rich, and where we should be export rich, all of the resources and all of the taxation that flows from Scotland is being hoovered away down into this black hole in Whitehall, where it's being wasted on what? On huge pay rises for MPs. The MPs have now had the fourth pay rise in 3 years, while the rest of the British workers are forced to endure cuts in their pay. and increases in their taxation. And not only that, but cuts in their public services and the National Health Service being eroded to the point where it's about to collapse, in England at least. The Scottish Government can no longer keep the wolf from the door. It can no longer mitigate the terrible effects of Tory austerity any longer. And for the first time, they've had to increase taxation this year, a little bit, for the top earners. But that's the first time they've ever been forced to use the tax trap powers that the Tory government has given the Scottish Parliament. Now that marks a turning point. This is the high water mark, if you like, for British power in Scotland. And from now on, things are going to get much, much worse, because the SNP, which has been in charge for 10 years and done its very best to keep Scotland afloat and to keep its excellent public services going, have reached a point now where it's going to be very difficult for them to maintain that now. And so it's essential, if we want this cognitive dissonance to go forever, when we finally get hold of our own natural resources and are able to use them for the good of our own people, that we start fighting now for this new independence campaign that's going to start this coming year. Because if we don't have another independence referendum within the next year, it will be too late. Because once Brexit starts, then the repeal bill will come into effect, and all the powers that we have currently located in Edinburgh to protect ourselves from the worst of austerity will be swept away as Holyrood is disempowered and eventually closed, as it inevitably must be, because there is no way that any British government could stand to have a Scottish government standing in the way of their economic plans. And their economic plans are basically to rob as much money from the Scottish economy as possible to mitigate the disastrous consequences of their Brexit. And that means they're going to take more from Scotland pardon me, and share it out even more amongst the areas of England that will be worst hit by Brexit as well. So I think it's time for those of us who have felt for a long time, maybe not nationalists and not even politically active people, but have felt for a long time that there's something very wrong in this country, that it's time now to stop sitting on the fence and hoping that things will get better, or hoping that if you don't vote somebody else will take care of it, or just hoping that people will stop talking about it because it's just driving you crazy listening to it. The point is, it doesn't matter how crazy it makes you listening to it, it's the rest of your life you're talking about, and it's the rest of your children's and grandchildren's lives that will be affected by this. If you're retired and you're living on a comfortable pension, or you're a wealthy individual whose business is unaffected by Brexit, you probably want to vote Conservative, and you probably aren't interested in what I'm saying here. But think for a moment about your own children and the rest of your family who are not perhaps as wealthy as you and who are struggling to get by. By you sitting on your backside and doing nothing about independence, you're going to condemn an entire generation or more generations to a deep recession of job losses and mass migrations out of Scotland to try and find work, similar to what we saw in the 1980s when Thatcher sold off all of the nationalised industries in this country. So I'm asking those of you who are maybe not very politically minded and perhaps traditionally would have voted Labour or Conservative to just think about the future. You may not have voted for Brexit at all. Even if you're a Tory or a Labour voter, you may have voted against it. And if you did vote against Brexit and you can see the dangers that I'm talking about, think again about independence, because even if you were a Conservative or a Labour voter, if you vote for independence, it doesn't mean you're voting for the SNP. It means you're voting for Scotland's Parliament to survive and for the powers to be taken back into that Parliament so that Scotland can control its resources. Now, you know, as a person with money and with wealth, and maybe with some kind of influence in your local community, that money talks, and Scotland has very little of it because it's being siphoned away. And if you're a business person, you'll know that Scotland needs businesses to succeed, and it needs exports to keep itself afloat. Those things are going to be badly damaged by Brexit. And as I say, if you voted against Brexit, you need to consider voting for independence now. Partly because you will survive better, your money will be safer, your taxation will be lower, because all of the money which you're currently paying in taxation to pay for public services in Scotland will not be needed so much, because with the revenues coming from both whisky, from exports, from tidal and renewable energy, and from oil and gas, all of those revenues will be held here in our central bank. And that means the Treasury in Scotland will have enough money to provide fantastic services and also to be able to cut your taxation. Now, that's something that you cannot guarantee with a Labour government, and you definitely cannot guarantee that with a Conservative government. The Tories might promise you some minor tax cuts, or the ability to own a bigger house without having to pay stamp duty or without having to pay as much inheritance tax. But the point is that you would actually be wealthier once Scotland's independent than you are now, because your company, if you own a company in Scotland, will be in a healthier state. There will be people flooding into Scotland to work here because the economy is going to be so much better. Your money will be worth more, and if you have a company which exports, you will be able to buy materials and commodities and raw materials, whatever you need for your business, much more cheaply with the Scottish pound, because it will be worth more. All of these things you need to think about. And if you've got a head on your shoulders for business, and you've got a head on your shoulders for money, which most Conservative and Labour voters do have, and not daft, you must recognise the risk that Scotland is facing at the moment from Brexit. Because if Holyrood is swept away, all the things that you currently take for granted, that you get for free, will vanish, and you will suddenly have to pay for your medical care, your medical insurance, your prescription charges, your care when you're old. You'll have to sell your house in order to have care when you're old. Things like that. Your grandchildren will no longer get free nursery places. Your children will have to pay fees to get their children into a nursery. They're going to have to work longer hours and harder for that. They're going to have lower wages, and they're going to need to work harder. So you, as the moneyed people, the people in the middle classes, have got the ability here to help those who are not working, who have not got as much money as you, and also to help the next generation of your family to be even better off and more successful and more secure than you are at the moment. So I'm asking you now, if you're in that bracket of, shall we say, middle class, working in an office, or you're working perhaps for a local authority, or you're working for the government, or you work for the Ministry of Defence or one of the contractors for them, or you're working in a big industry like the whisky industry. If you work in all of those sorts of things where there's big money involved, you might think that you're going to be future-proof. But just think about this. When Brexit hits and the export orders start to dry up, who is going to be the first person sacked in your company? It will be the middle managers. It will be the human resources managers. It'll be the training managers, the safety managers. It will be the people in the middle, the ones that can do without. It won't be the managing directors of big companies. It'll be you, the middle classes, who start to lose your jobs. It's not just going to be the poor workers sweeping the streets and emptying the bins and doing the cleaning work. It will be you that gets hurt, not just everybody else. And this is the point that I'm trying to make about dissonance. There is something badly wrong in Scotland, and you are ignoring it, and you need to stop ignoring it and wake up. And it's time to take some action right now. You don't need to join a party, you just need to come online and join one of the groups online which is campaigning for independence. We could have millionaires for independence, I don't really care. We could have wealthy Tories for independence, it doesn't really matter. The point is, after independence, there will still be opportunities for political parties like the Labour Party to reform in Scotland, to become a proper Scottish Labour Party, to have a proper Scottish business-oriented party like the Conservatives are at the moment. There will be opportunities for all of you to do this. You don't have to fear it, and you don't have to hate the SNP. You just have to act in your own interests and in the interests of the next generations of your family. And that's what I'm asking you to do. Is don't think about, you don't even have to think about the rest of the country, just think about your own family, for goodness sake. Do they mean nothing to you? Do your grandchildren's futures mean nothing to you? What are you going to leave to your grandchildren when you finally shuffle off this mortal coil? You might be in retirement for 30 years, spending your way through the wealth that you've accumulated in your pension. But the point is, if the Tories get their way and Brexit happens and Scotland is not given a chance to vote for independence at all, then you're not going to have that wealth anymore. You're going to be forced to sell your house, spend your wealth on your care. You're not going to get it free off the Scottish Government anymore. All the benefits that you get are going to be completely ruined and wrecked and taken away. So it will hit you. It will hit all of us, and it is not going to care whether you're wealthy or not, whether you're middle management, upper management, whether you've just got into management, or whether you are working in some support industry or at a call centre. Everybody, every single person will be hit with deeper austerity and a longer recession than you've ever experienced, all because one part of the United Kingdom wants to close its doors to foreign workers, because that's all it's about. It's about nothing more than shutting people out of England. And because people in England want to shut people out, the rest of us have to suffer our economies being wrecked and our jobs being lost. And I don't think anybody would like that. So wake up, everybody, and particularly middle class people, wake up too. I don't class myself as middle class. In fact, I don't class myself as any class. I'm just a person. I'm a human being. I'm a Scottish citizen. I work for myself. I have my own business. I'm not wealthy, but I'm doing okay. And even I know from the last recession how badly it hurt my business in 2008. I'm sure you remember how bad things got then. Well, imagine that again times 10. Okay, I'm off to actually do some real work now, but I want you to think about this. That dissonance that you feel, that feeling that there's something wrong, it's not fantasy, it's real. Despite what the media tells you, despite what the Daily Mail and all these other terrible rags that the British press throw out at us, despite all of the lies that they are spreading around, your country's in danger, your pension's in danger, and your family's lives and their livelihoods are in danger, and it's time for you to act. I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.